My name is Marion. For 58 days, that was the only thing I was absolutely sure of. Everything else was a thick, cloying fog, a haze that muffled my thoughts and stole my memories. The walls of my room here at Maple Creek Meadows were a soft, therapeutic beige, a color meant to soothe, but to me it was the color of surrender. It was the color of the life my brother Wesley had chosen for me. He'd visit once a week, his face a perfect mask of strained concern, his hand patting mine with a gentleness that felt like a violation. He would tell the nurses how I was slipping away, how the vibrant, sharp sister he knew was lost in the labyrinth of early-onset dementia. He'd bring me a small box of chocolates, always the cheap kind from the gas station, the ones with the waxy, tasteless coating that I'd always hated. He'd sit there and watch me try to unwrap one with trembling fingers, a small, sad smile on his face, a performance for the staff, a performance of the grieving brother. And the doctors, bless their well-intentioned hearts, they believed him. Why wouldn't they? I was the textbook case they read about in medical school, disoriented, confused, prone to fits of frustrated weeping. I couldn't remember what I'd eaten for breakfast, let alone manage a multi-million-dollar estate. My signature on the power of attorney documents was a spidery, uncertain thing, my hand guided by his. He'd told me it was just to help pay my bills, a temporary measure until I felt better. He was so convincing, so earnest. He'd always been a good actor. He needed to be. His entire life was built on a scaffolding of lies, held together by charm and my money. His gambling debts were a secret demon we both knew about, a chasm he'd been throwing my inheritance into for years, but now he'd found the perfect way to seize the principal. He was going to sell my house, liquidate my portfolio, and feed it all to the loan sharks that were breathing down his neck. He was going to burn down my life to warm his hands. He made only one mistake. He got arrogant. He assumed that every person in a white coat was an automaton, a stranger just doing a job. He didn't know that our family tree had branches he'd long since ignored. He didn't know that my sister, his estranged wife's daughter, my brilliant niece Amelia, was a neurology fellow at Johns Hopkins. And he certainly didn't know that she, by a staggering coincidence of fate, was assigned to do a fellowship rotation reviewing patient cases at this very facility. He just saw a nice young resident, a fresh-faced doctor who did my weekly checkups with a polite, professional smile. He never recognized her. He hadn't seen Amelia since she was a teenager, before she dropped her father's tainted surname and taken her mother's. He saw her as just another part of the scenery, another gullible official to whom he could spin his sad, sorry tale. But Amelia saw me, not the vacant-eyed patient on the chart, but her Aunt Marion. And she saw the symptoms not as dementia, but as something terrifyingly familiar from her toxicology rotations. Pharmacological poisoning. She saw the subtle tremors, the pinpoint pupils, the specific cadence of my confused speech. It wasn't the slow, heartbreaking fade of a neurodegenerative disease. It was the brutal chemical sledgehammer of an overdose. For the last 2 weeks, the little paper cup of pills the morning nurse gives me hasn't held the potent antipsychotics. Wesley arranged for through a crooked doctor he had on his payroll. It holds placebos, sugar pills. Amelia has been swapping them herself, a breathtaking risk to her career, a quiet, furious act of rebellion conducted in the sterile silence of the facility's pharmacy. Wesley doesn't know. He doesn't know that the fog is lifting. Every day a little more. At first it was just colors seeming brighter. The beige walls looked less like surrender and more like a challenge. Then came the sounds. The squeak of a nurse's shoes, the distant chime of the dinner bell. They weren't just a confusing soup of noise anymore. They were distinct. They were real. And now the memories are coming back. not in a flood, but in sharp, painful shards. I remember the taste of the metallic bitterness he'd started adding to my morning orange juice months ago, telling me it was a new liquid vitamin. I remember the day he brought the first doctor to my house, how I couldn't follow the conversation, how the words floated around me like smoke. I remember the look of triumph in his eyes when I failed to name the current president, and I remember everything before that. I remember a lifetime of being the responsible one, the stable one, the one who co-signed his loans and paid his rent and listened to his tearful, fleeting promises to get his life together. My name is Marion. My brother tried to erase me. He doesn't know that I'm sitting here, in this beige room, perfectly still, and for the first time in months I am remembering everything. And I am planning. It wasn't about revenge, not at first, but now it is. The first week on the placebos was a disorienting swim toward a surface I couldn't see. My mind felt like a house where the power was flickering back on, room by room, casting strange shadows and revealing messes I didn't remember making. I would have moments of startling clarity, a sudden vivid memory of my garden in late spring, the scent of the peonies so real I could almost feel the velvety petals against my cheek. Then just as quickly the fog would roll back in, and I'd be staring at the hands in my lap, wondering whose they were. They looked so old. Amelia was my anchor. She'd come in for my checkup, her face a mask of clinical neutrality, but her eyes, her bright, intelligent eyes, they were screaming encouragement. She would ask me the standard orientation questions, but she'd subtly change them. Instead of "Who is the president?" she would ask, "Marion, tell me about your mother's favorite recipe for sauerbraten." It was a brilliant, gentle trick. The question bypassed the part of my brain that was still struggling with recent factual data and tapped into the deep emotional core of my long-term memory. The first time she asked, my mind was a blank. Sauerbraten. The word echoed in the emptiness, but the next day a flicker. I remembered the smell, that sharp, tangy scent of vinegar and spices that would fill our entire house for days before a holiday. I remembered the heavy ceramic crock my mother kept it in, the one with the small chip on the lid. Amelia would listen, nodding, making notes on her chart that I knew were not for the facility's official records. Her notes were for us. They were the first threads of the rope we were weaving. She told me the drug Wesley had been using was a powerful sedative, often used off-label in unethical nursing homes to make patients more manageable. In high, sustained doses, it perfectly mimicked the symptoms of a rapid-onset dementia. It was a poisoner's perfect tool, cruel, effective, and easily explained away by a pre-existing condition he himself had invented. During that second week, the shards of memory began to knit themselves together, forming a mosaic of my life with Wesley, and it was a deeply unflattering portrait. He was the golden child, the sun around which my parents' world revolved. He was all flash and charm, while I was the quiet, steady planet, useful for my gravitational pull but never admired for my own light. I remembered my college graduation. I was summa cum laude in accounting. My parents came, but they left early to get to Wesley's baseball game. He was pitching, and he was, in my father's words, on the cusp of something big. That cusp never materialized. The baseball scholarship evaporated after a shoulder injury he sustained falling down a flight of stairs at a fraternity party. But the pattern was set. His potential was always more important than my achievements. My father, a man who believed in firm handshakes and balanced ledgers, was a walking contradiction when it came to his son. Wesley could drain his bank account, and my father would sigh and say, "The boy has a fire in his belly, Marion. It just gets away from him sometimes." That fire cost them their retirement savings. When they passed away, just a few years apart, there wasn't much left. But they owned the family home outright, a beautiful old Victorian in a neighborhood that was rapidly gentrifying. They left it to both of us, 50-50, a gesture of fairness that in reality was anything but. I was the one who paid the property taxes, who fixed the leaky roof, who updated the ancient plumbing. Wesley used his half of the deed as collateral for a loan he immediately lost in a single weekend in Atlantic City. I had to buy out the loan to stop the bank from forcing a sale. In essence, I had paid for my half of the house, and then I had paid for his. But legally, his name was still on the deed alongside mine. A detail that seemed like a mere annoyance then, but I see now it was the cornerstone of his whole monstrous plan. One afternoon, as I sat staring out the window at the meticulously manicured, soulless garden of Maple Creek Meadows, the memory came. It was the one that finally burned away the last vestiges of fog and replaced it with a cold, hard certainty. It was about a year before Wesley started his poisoning campaign. He'd come to me, his eyes red-rimmed, his voice choked with a performance of shame that Meryl Streep would have applauded. He'd gotten in deep with a bookie, a serious one. He needed $50,000, or they were going to break his legs. It was the biggest sum he'd ever asked for. I remember the exhaustion I felt, the deep, bone-weary resignation. I said no. For the first time, I truly said no. I told him he was a grown man, and this was a hole he had to dig himself out of. He didn't rage. He didn't plead. He did something far worse. He went to our parents' graves. He sent me a photo of him sitting between their headstones, his face buried in his hands. The text message that followed read, "I'm so sorry to have disappointed them. And you, I just don't know how to go on." It was manipulation of the highest order, a weaponization of my grief and my lingering sense of familial duty. It was emotional blackmail, and it worked. I transferred the money. 2 days later, my cousin sent me a photo from her friend's social media feed. It was a picture from a VIP lounge at a casino in Vegas, and there was Wesley in the background, laughing, a glass of champagne in his hand, a mountain of chips in front of him. He hadn't been in danger. He had just wanted a stake for a high-stakes poker game. He'd used the memory of our parents as a poker chip. Lying in my bed in that beige room, the full, unadulterated memory of that betrayal hit me with the force of a physical blow. The $50,000 was just money. I had more. But the violation of that moment, the calculated cruelty of it, that was a debt that could never be repaid in cash. I understood then that Wesley didn't just see me as a bank. He saw me as a fool. My kindness, my loyalty, my sense of responsibility, he saw it all as a profound weakness to be exploited. He believed I was an inexhaustible resource, a thing to be used, not a person to be loved. That night, when Amelia came in on her late-night rounds, she found me not in bed, but sitting in the chair by the window, fully dressed. The light from the hallway illuminated my face. She stopped short in the doorway. "Aunt Marion," she whispered. I looked at her, and for the first time in months, my eyes were clear. The confusion was gone. The fear was gone. In their place was something that made her take a small step back. "Amelia," I said, and my voice was steady, the tremor completely gone. "We need a lawyer, not just a good one. We need a shark, and we need to find out everything you can about Wesley's finances. I want to know about every card he's played, every debt he owes, and every penny he thinks he's about to get from me." My resolve had crystallized. This was no longer just about getting out of this place. It was about dismantling my brother's life with the same cold, methodical precision he had used to try and dismantle my mind. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about justice. A justice so total, so absolute that he would never ever be able to hurt anyone again. The resolve had arrived. The secret planning sessions with Amelia had the thrilling, high-stakes tension of a spy movie, except our clandestine meetings took place in the aggressively cheerful sunroom of Maple Creek Meadows, surrounded by half-dozing octogenarians and the scent of lemon-scented disinfectant. Amelia was my general, my strategist, and my only link to the outside world. She was also terrified. I could see it in the way she'd clench her jaw when she thought I wasn't looking, the slight tremor in her hand as she passed me a folder of documents disguised as a travel magazine. "Aunt Marion, you have to understand the risk I'm taking," she said one afternoon, her voice a low, urgent whisper. We were pretending to look at pictures of the Swiss Alps while she was actually showing me online articles about challenging a fraudulent power of attorney. Treating a family member, even an initial assessment, is a gray area. But what I'm doing, swapping medication, running unofficial toxicology screenings on your blood samples using lab resources, if anyone at the hospital found out, I could lose my fellowship. I could be blackballed. My career would be over before it even started. I reached across the table and placed my hand over hers. My own hand was steady now, a stark contrast to the palsied shaking of just a few weeks prior. "I know, my dear, and I will never ever forget what you are risking for me. But you are a Vance. Your grandmother, my sister, was the fiercest woman I ever knew. She would have done the same. This isn't just about my money or my house. This is about what he did. He tried to unmake me. We can't let him get away with it." Her eyes, which were so much like her grandmother's, hardened with a fresh wave of determination. "No, we can't." Our strategy had two fronts, the medical and the legal. On the medical front, Amelia was a meticulous archivist of my recovery. She kept a detailed private journal, charting the daily improvement in my cognitive function since the cessation of the sedative. She had a copy of the initial toxicology report she'd run on the sly, showing the massive levels of the drug in my system, and a new clean report from the previous day. It was a perfect before and after snapshot, a medical narrative that told a story of poisoning, not dementia. "The key is the contrast," she explained, pointing to the two reports. "His entire case for guardianship rests on the diagnosis of dementia, a progressive, incurable disease. But you're not progressing. You're recovering. Rapidly. It's medically impossible. This right here," she tapped the clean report, "dismantles their entire premise." On the legal front, we found our shark. Amelia, using the university's legal aid resources, found a man named Marcus Thorne. He was a semi-retired litigator who now worked almost exclusively pro bono on cases of elder abuse, a personal crusade he'd embarked on after his own father had been swindled by a predatory caregiver. He was sharp, cynical, and had the demeanor of a hungry barracuda. We had a video call with him, Amelia holding her tablet in the sunroom while I pretended to be listening to an audiobook. Marcus Thorne was all business. His face on the screen was craggy and lined, but his eyes were sharp and missed nothing. "So let me get this straight," he said, his voice a low growl. "Your brother drugs you to simulate dementia, gets a crooked doctor to sign off on your incompetence, assumes power of attorney, and commits you to a private facility, all so he can sell your assets to pay off his bookie. And his one critical error was not realizing that his own niece is a neurology fellow at Johns Hopkins, who happened to be on rotation at the same facility. Is that the gist of it?" "That's the gist of it," I confirmed. A slow, wolfish grin spread across Marcus's face. "Oh, this is beautiful. This is poetry. It's so brazen, so arrogant, it's almost admirable. Almost." He laid out the plan. We couldn't just march in and accuse Wesley. Wesley would claim Amelia was a vindictive niece with a grudge, that she was manipulating a sick old woman. He would muddy the waters. No, we had to let Wesley think he was still in control. We had to let him take the next step. "He's got the POA," Marcus said. "He's probably already listed the house. He's probably talking to wealth managers about liquidating your portfolio. We need to let him walk right into the trap. We'll file for an emergency injunction to freeze all your assets and a petition to invalidate the POA on grounds of fraud. But we don't serve him yet. We wait. We let him sign a purchase agreement on your house. We let him execute a trade order on your stocks. We let him commit overt, undeniable acts of fraud. We need his fingerprints on the weapon. While Marcus prepared the legal bombshells, Amelia and I worked on our own intelligence gathering. I played the part of the slowly fading patient perfectly. When Wesley visited, I would affect a slight tremor. I would seem confused, asking him the same question 2 or 3 times. I had a lifetime of watching him act to draw from. It turned out I was a much better performer than he was. He bought it completely. He'd sit there oozing that false sympathy, telling me not to worry about anything, that he was handling it all. "The house is going to need a lot of repairs, Marion," he said one day. His voice laced with fake regret. "The taxes are just so high. I think it might be time to let it go. Get you a nice nest egg so you can be comfortable here for a long, long time." He was framing the sale of my home as an act of loving prudence. The audacity was breathtaking. Meanwhile, we got a glimpse into the source of his desperation. It was a subplot I hadn't fully appreciated until Amelia, through some clever and legally dubious social engineering, managed to get a look at his phone records, which he'd foolishly left on a shared family plan. There were dozens of calls and threatening texts from a single number. The sender was a man identified only as Silas. The messages were chilling. "The clock is ticking, Wes. My patience is not infinite. You know what happens to people who don't pay their debts. It's not just your legs I'm thinking about." One evening while Wesley was visiting me, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He glanced at it and I saw all the color drain from his face. That confident, smug mask dissolved into a face of pure animal terror. He quickly stood up, mumbled something about a work emergency, and practically ran from the room. I saw him through the window standing by his car, his posture coiled and desperate as he spoke into the phone. He was a man standing on a trap door, and he thought selling my life was the only thing that would stop it from opening. "He's not just greedy," I told Amelia later that night. "He's terrified, and a terrified man will make mistakes." Our plan was no longer just a defensive one. It was a hunt. We had the medical evidence, the legal strategy, and now a clear picture of his motive and his pressure points. He thought he was the predator, stalking through my life and taking what he wanted. He had no idea that we were the hunters, watching him from the shadows, our nets perfectly placed, just waiting for him to take that one final fatal step. I started to feel a grim satisfaction, a cold fire in my belly that felt nothing like Wesley's reckless flames, but rather like the focused blue heat of a welder's torch. I was being remade in this fire, not into something weaker but into something harder, sharper, and utterly unbreakable. The first move was silent and swift, a single stone tossed into the placid surface of Wesley's fraudulent world, destined to create a tidal wave. On a Tuesday morning, Marcus Thorne, our legal shark, filed the emergency petition with the court. It was a masterpiece of controlled aggression, a detailed narrative of fraud supported by Amelia's meticulously documented medical observations and my own sworn affidavit, which I had signed with a clear, firm hand. The petition requested an immediate temporary freeze on all assets held in my name, pending a competency hearing. Crucially, as per our strategy, the order was sealed and Wesley was not to be served immediately. The court, seeing the evidence of potential criminal activity and elder abuse, granted the freeze within hours. A silent digital wall slammed down around my estate. Wesley just didn't know it yet. He tried to make his move 2 days later. According to the private investigator Marcus had hired, a man who blended into the background like a pigeon on a city street. Wesley met a realtor at my house. He was seen laughing, pointing out the original crown moldings, talking about market value. He signed the listing agreement on the spot. He was practically giddy with the prospect of his imminent windfall. The next morning, he tried to initiate a wire transfer from my primary brokerage account to his own, a down payment for a new, more suitable long-term care arrangement, as he would later try to claim. The transfer, of course, was rejected. The bank, bound by the court order, simply returned a sterile, automated message: transaction cannot be processed. Account restricted. This was the first tremor he felt. We didn't see it directly, but Amelia's continued monitoring of his phone records painted a vivid picture. He called the bank. First he was charming and reasonable. Then, as the customer service representative stonewalled him with corporate speak about standard security protocols, his tone shifted. It became demanding, then arrogant, then outright abusive. He screamed at a poor anonymous call center employee, demanding to speak to a manager, proclaiming his legal authority under the power of attorney. He got nowhere. The wall was invisible, but it was made of steel. His panic began to curdle into paranoia. His next call was to the real estate agent, asking if she'd put a lien on the house for her commission already, a nonsensical accusation that left the poor woman utterly bewildered. He was a man in a dark room swinging at phantoms. Then he turned his attention to me. He arrived at Maple Creek Meadows that afternoon unannounced. He stormed up to the front desk, his face a mask of thunderous rage. "I am here to see my sister Marion Vance," he announced, his voice booming through the quiet lobby. "I am her legal guardian." The head nurse, a formidable woman named Brenda, who was now fully briefed by Marcus and had seen the APS report, met his gaze without flinching. "I'm sorry, Mr. Vance. Marion is resting. She is not accepting visitors at the moment." "Not accepting visitors," he sputtered. "I am not a visitor. I am her brother, her protector. She is a sick woman. She doesn't know what she's saying. Her chart says she is lucid today," Brenda replied, her voice as cool and smooth as river stone. "And she has requested not to be disturbed. That is her right." He was flummoxed. His primary tool, my supposed incompetence, had just been turned against him. He couldn't argue that I was too sick to make decisions, and in the same breath override my decision not to see him. He stood there, his jaw working silently, his entire framework of control dissolving before his eyes. He tried to push past the desk, and Brenda, with the calm authority of a woman who had seen everything, simply picked up her phone and said, "Security." He deflated instantly, backing away with a final, impotent glare before storming out. The pièce de résistance of his panic, however, came that evening. He called Amelia. He didn't know she was the architect of his misery. He still saw her as the nice young resident, a potential pawn. His voice on the phone, which Amelia put on speaker for me to hear, was a slick, poisonous syrup of feigned concern. "Dr. Vance, it's Wesley Vance, Marion's brother. I am so terribly worried about her." He sounded like he was on the verge of tears. It was another masterful performance. "The facility is blocking me from seeing her. I think one of the nurses has gotten some strange ideas in her head, maybe turned Marion against me. You see her every week. You know how confused she gets. She needs me. I'm the only family she has who can really take care of things." Amelia played her part beautifully. Her voice was full of professional sympathy. "Oh, Mr. Vance, that sounds very stressful. It's true that patients with dementia can sometimes have moments of paranoia, even towards their loved ones. It's a very sad part of the disease." "Exactly," he said, seizing on the validation. "That's it exactly. Doctor, I need your help. Could you perhaps make a note in her file about her state of confusion today, just to document this episode? It would help me so much with the administration to make them understand that I need to be there to oversee her care. I listened, my blood running cold. He was asking Amelia to falsify my medical records to support his lie, the very lie she was working to expose. He was trying to recruit the lead prosecutor as a witness for the defense. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was stunning. Amelia's response was a work of art. "Well, Mr. Vance, my ethical obligations are to my patients' well-being and the accuracy of their medical file. But I will certainly make a detailed note of my full assessment of her cognitive state during my next examination. You can be sure of that." She hung up the phone. The silence in my small beige room was profound. He was cornered. He was terrified. And he was getting sloppy. The silent takeover was complete. He was now a king ruling a kingdom that no longer existed, issuing commands that no one would obey. His panic was a symphony, and we were listening to every note, just waiting for the crescendo. The power shift was not a sudden explosion, but a quiet, inexorable tide turning. The foundation of Wesley's authority was built on a single powerful narrative that he was the sole concerned family member caring for a sister lost to dementia. Our next move was to dismantle that narrative, brick by brick, not with accusations but with simple, undeniable truth. It was time for the family exodus. Wesley and I have a small, scattered family, a couple of aunts, a handful of cousins. They were good people for the most part, but distant. They had heard Wesley's version of the story and had accepted it with sad resignation. They'd sent cards with pictures of their grandchildren and notes expressing their sorrow over my condition. They believed him because it was easier than the alternative. Marcus Thorne advised against direct confrontation. "We don't want to look like we're trying to poison the jury pool," he'd said. "We just want to plant a seed of doubt, a very powerful seed." So Amelia arranged a series of video calls. The first was with my Aunt Carol, my mother's younger sister. She was a sweet, slightly dotty woman who lived in Arizona and loved to gossip. Wesley had told her I was barely verbal. Amelia set up the tablet in my room, and I put on the lilac cashmere sweater Carol had given me for Christmas 2 years ago. When Carol's face appeared on the screen, her expression was one of pained sympathy. "Oh, Marion, dear, it's so good to see your face." I gave her a warm, genuine smile. "It's wonderful to see you too, Carol. How is that rogue bougainvillea that was trying to eat your garage?" Carol's jaw went slack. Her eyes widened. You remember my bougainvillea?" "Of course I do. You were complaining about it in your Christmas card. You said Bob was threatening it with a machete. Did he ever go through with it?" We talked for 20 minutes. I asked about her son's new baby, remembering the name Cody. I recalled a funny story from a family reunion 10 years ago that made her roar with laughter. I didn't mention Wesley once. I didn't mention the facility. I was just her niece, Marion, sharp as a tack, warm as ever. The entire time a look of profound, deepening confusion was etched on Carol's face. She was trying to reconcile the woman on her screen with the tragic, dementia-addled patient from Wesley's stories. The two images could not coexist. "Marion," she said finally, her voice hesitant. "You seem so well. I'm feeling much clearer these days, Carol." I said, my tone light. "It's amazing what a little rest can do." I knew that the moment we hung up, Carol would be on the phone. And she was, within the hour. According to a follow-up call from another cousin, Carol had called 3 other family members, her voice a whirlwind of confusion and suspicion. "I just talked to Marion. For 20 minutes. She's completely fine. She asked about my bougainvillea. Wesley told me she couldn't even recognize people anymore. Something is very, very wrong." The seed was not just planted, it had sprouted. The second and third calls with my cousins Mark and Sheila went much the same way. I was lucid, funny, and specific. The family grapevine, which Wesley had so expertly used to spread his lies, was now working against him, broadcasting his deception at lightning speed. Wesley felt the ground shifting beneath him. He must have received a confused call from Aunt Carol, because his desperation escalated into a full-blown meltdown. He chose the worst possible stage for his final desperate act of counter-manipulation, the lobby of Maple Creek Meadows. He showed up late one afternoon, his face flushed, his eyes wild. He didn't even try to be charming this time. He was a cornered animal. He began to shout, his voice echoing off the polished floors. "I want to see my sister. You are holding her against her will. She is a sick woman, and her quack of a niece is manipulating her." He was pointing a finger at Nurse Brenda, who stood calmly behind the reception desk. "That so-called Dr. Amelia Vance. She's a fraud. She should have her license revoked. She's probably trying to get her hands on Marion's money." It was a spectacular miscalculation. He was publicly accusing Amelia of the very crime he himself was committing. He was projecting his own motives onto the one person who was trying to save me. The staff and a few visiting family members stared, mouths agape. Nurse Brenda didn't even raise her voice. She simply picked up the phone. "Security, we have a disturbance in the main lobby. And could you please notify Mr. Thorne's office that his client is being harassed?" The mention of Marcus's name was like a bucket of ice water on Wesley. His tirade faltered. His eyes darted around, suddenly aware of the audience, of the cell phone a visitor was holding up, likely recording the whole pathetic spectacle. The security guards, two large, no-nonsense men, arrived and flanked him. They didn't touch him. They just stood there, their presence an impassable wall. "Sir," one of them said, his voice low and firm, "I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Wesley looked from the guards to Nurse Brenda, to the horrified faces in the lobby. He saw no allies. He saw no sympathy. The narrative of the devoted brother had been shredded. In its place was the raw, ugly truth, a desperate, angry man losing control. He turned, his shoulders slumped in defeat, and shuffled out the automatic doors, the recording of his own downfall likely already on its way to my lawyer. I watched the whole thing from the security monitor in the nurse's station, where Brenda had quietly invited me to sit. I felt no triumph, only a profound and weary sadness. He wasn't a monster. He was just a weak man, a man so hollowed out by his own failures and addictions that he'd tried to fill the void with my life. His panic was the desperate flailing of a man who was finally, after a lifetime of being bailed out, being forced to face the consequences of his own choices. The power had not just shifted, it had been reclaimed. The family exodus was complete. There was nowhere left for him to hide. The final confrontation was not the dramatic shouting match I had once imagined. It was cold, sterile, and brutally efficient, held in a conference room at Marcus Thorne's downtown law office. The room was dominated by a long, polished mahogany table that felt as vast and unforgiving as an ocean. On one side sat Wesley. He looked smaller than I'd ever seen him, shrunken inside a suit that was a size too big, his face pale and clammy. He refused to make eye contact with me. Beside him sat his lawyer, a young, slick-looking man who already seemed to be regretting every decision that had led him to this room. On our side, there was me, Amelia, and Marcus. I felt a strange calm, the kind that comes after a long fever has broken. I was wearing a simple dark blue dress, a color of quiet authority. Amelia sat beside me, her posture erect, her expression unreadable. And at the head of our side of the table was Marcus, who looked as comfortable and dangerous as a shark in its native habitat. He had arranged a series of large foam core boards on an easel, each one covered by a plain white sheet. Wesley's lawyer began, clearing his throat and shuffling his papers. My client, Mr. Vance, is here today in a spirit of reconciliation, he began, his voice lacking any conviction. He has acted at all times with his sister's best interests at heart, under the guidance of qualified medical professionals. This entire situation is a tragic misunderstanding, fueled by outside influences. He glanced meaningfully at Amelia. Marcus let the silence hang in the air for a moment before he spoke. A misunderstanding, he repeated, his voice soft but carrying an edge of steel. That's an interesting word for it. Let's see if we can't clear up this misunderstanding with a few facts. He stood and walked to the easel. With a theatrical flick of his wrist, he whipped the sheet off the first board. It was a giant, blown-up copy of Wesley's bank statement, with dozens of transactions highlighted in yellow. Payments to online casinos. Large cash withdrawals at ATMs near racetracks. A long list of bounced checks. Fact number 1, Marcus said, his voice resonating in the quiet room. Your client, Mr. Vance, has gambling-related debts exceeding $200,000. He is, for all intents and purposes, insolvent. Wesley's lawyer started to object, but Marcus was already pulling the sheet off the second board. It was a timeline. On one side, it listed the dates of Wesley's major financial losses. On the other, it detailed the progression of my illness. The correlation was undeniable. Every time Wesley suffered a major gambling loss, my health took a mysterious sharp decline a few weeks later. Fact number 2, your client's concern for his sister's health appears to be directly proportional to the urgency of his own financial desperation, Marcus stated coldly. Wesley sank lower in his chair, his gaze fixed on the mahogany table. Marcus moved to the third board. This one held 2 documents side by side. The first was the power of attorney document, with my shaky, feeble signature. The second was a sample of my handwriting from a letter I'd written just 3 months prior, the script confident and strong. Below them was a report from a forensic handwriting expert. Fact number 3, the signature on the POA, while technically yours, Marion, was determined by our expert to have been written under conditions of extreme physical or cognitive duress. It is, legally speaking, a signature obtained under fraudulent circumstances. Finally, Marcus unveiled the last board. It was the smoking gun. 2 toxicology reports. The first, from my initial week at Maple Creek Meadows, showed a massive non-therapeutic level of a powerful sedative in my bloodstream. The second, taken 2 weeks later, was completely clean. And fact number 4, Marcus said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone, is the medical evidence. Evidence that my client was not suffering from a progressive neurodegenerative disease, but from systematic long-term poisoning, a condition that miraculously vanished the moment her medication was managed by a competent, ethical medical professional. He paused and looked directly at Wesley. A condition that will be of great interest to the district attorney's office. The room was utterly silent. Wesley's lawyer looked at his client, his expression a mixture of fury and despair. Wesley finally looked up. He looked at me. His eyes were no longer arrogant or fearful. They were just empty. The charade was over. All the lies, all the manipulation, all the years of carefully constructed deceit had been demolished in the space of 5 minutes. I spoke for the first time, my voice clear and steady, cutting through the silence. Why, Wesley? It was the only question that mattered. He stared at me, his mouth opening and closing silently for a moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was a raw, broken whisper. I didn't know what else to do. I was drowning. I thought you'd always be there to fix it. You always were. And there it was. The pathetic, rotten core of it all. He didn't see it as a monstrous betrayal. He saw it as a continuation of our lifelong pattern. I was the fixer, and he had broken something so badly that he thought the only solution was to break me too. He saw my strength, not as a gift, but as an entitlement. "You didn't just try to take my money," I said, my voice devoid of the rage I thought I would feel. All I felt was a vast, cold emptiness where my love for him used to be. "You tried to take my mind. You tried to take my memories. You tried to take me. You were willing to let me rot in that place, a ghost in my own life, just so you could go back to the tables. There is no fixing this, Wesley. There is no reconciliation." Marcus stepped forward and placed a document on the table in front of Wesley's lawyer. "This is a settlement offer. Your client will sign a full confession. He will relinquish any and all claim to his sister's estate and the family home. He will consent to the permanent invalidation of the power of attorney. In return, Marion will consider not pursuing private civil damages beyond the recovery of her legal fees." Wesley's lawyer scanned the document and nodded numbly. "And the criminal charges?" Criminal charges are non-negotiable," Marcus said with a thin, cruel smile. "A copy of this entire file is already on its way to the police. Elder abuse, fraud, poisoning. I imagine the DA will have a field day. This document is simply to settle the civil matter and to ensure your client never ever bothers his sister again." The new reality settled into the room, heavy and permanent. Wesley signed the papers without another word, his hand shaking so badly the signature was barely a scribble. It was over. I stood up, followed by Amelia and Marcus. I didn't look at my brother again. As I walked out of the room and into the bright afternoon sun, I didn't feel joy. I didn't feel vengeful glee. I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a storm that had finally passed, leaving behind a clean, scoured landscape where I could finally begin to build again. It's been 6 months since that day in the lawyer's office. I'm sitting in my own living room, in my own house. The afternoon sun is streaming through the bay window, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. The house is mine, and mine alone, the deed now clean and unencumbered. There's a quietness here that feels different from the muffled silence of Maple Creek meadows. This is the silence of peace, not of imprisonment. Wesley's trial is set for the fall. From what Marcus tells me, the evidence is so overwhelming that the district attorney is offering a plea bargain, but it will still involve significant jail time. His bookie Silas was also arrested. It turns out that when a desperate man's entire financial life is laid bare in a court filing, other interested parties start paying attention. The house of cards didn't just collapse. It took the whole crooked casino down with it. Aunt Carol and my other relatives have called, of course. Their calls are a clumsy ballet of apology and awkwardness. They are horrified by what Wesley did, but they are also, I think, horrified by their own gullibility, their willingness to accept the easy lie over the difficult truth. I'm polite but distant. The trust that was broken is not something that can be easily mended. Forgiveness is a complicated thing, and I haven't found it in myself yet. Maybe I never will. Amelia is thriving. The Internal Review Board at Johns Hopkins, after being discreetly informed by Marcus of the full context, gave her a commendation for her extraordinary diagnostic acumen and ethical integrity under duress. She took a great risk, a choice that many would debate, but she did it to save a life. My life. She comes over for dinner every Sunday. We sit in the garden she helped me replant, and we talk about everything and nothing. In her I see the very best of our family's legacy, the strength, the intelligence, the fierce, unwavering loyalty. She is the future. Wesley was the past. For a long time I asked myself if I could have done things differently, if I had been stricter with him sooner, if I had cut him off years ago, if I had refused to be the family fixer. But that kind of thinking is a trap. It's a way of accepting blame for someone else's choices. My kindness was not a mistake. My loyalty was not a flaw. They were qualities he chose to exploit. The failure was his, not mine. He saw compassion as weakness, and that was his fatal error. This whole ordeal taught me something profound. The most insidious prisons are not the ones with beige walls and locked doors. They are the prisons of expectation, of guilt, of a narrative that someone else has written for you. Breaking out of that kind of prison doesn't happen with a single dramatic escape. It happens slowly, quietly, with one small act of rebellion at a time. It happens when you start trusting your own mind over the gaslighting voices of others. It happens when you finally decide that your own peace is more important than keeping up a fiction for someone else's comfort. It wasn't about the money, it was about the right to my own mind. It wasn't about revenge, until it had to be about justice. Because sometimes justice is the only thing that can truly set you free. And I am, for the first time in a very long time, truly and completely free. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever felt taken for granted or had your kindness mistaken for weakness, I hope my journey gives you a little bit of strength. Please share your own stories and thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories of vindication and new beginnings. It really helps the channel grow and allows me to share more stories like this one. Remember to take care of yourselves and each other.